Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your host, and today we have another in our wonderful series of Voices of Our Lives. Today we're going to be talking with Tom Schumacher, who is the president of actually 3 divisions at the Walt Disney Studios, film animation, TV animation, and theatrical. And since I just saw Aida last night, I'm very excited to be talking to him. But that's not the only reason we're talking to Tom. He's had a long and interesting career, not just in the industry, but with our community, and we're very proud to have you here, Tom. Welcome.
It's exciting to be here. It's kind of a fancy studio, all things considered.
What do you mean, all things considered? Not Disney? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't know that this beautiful room that just wraps around us all the way around. It's fantastic.
It's a little gayer than Disney, too, do you think? Just in its decor, although
well,
I'm not sure your office may look like this.
You know, it's the Gertrude Stein shot, the Isherwood drawing, Bacardi's Isherwood piece. Yeah, it has a kind of a whimsy. Is that what you meant by the
Yes,
gayer?
a little whimsical, right. Anyway, I'm very, very glad to have you here. And one of the things we like to do, I mean, you've done extraordinary work, but I don't want to just talk about your work. It's kind of about you as well, and you know, how your life has flowed along or not.
You don't bring people out and there's a book and then like my 3rd grade teacher comes out. That doesn't happen, does it?
No.
Oh,
you
good.
mean like this was your life?
Yeah.
No, you're much too young to have something like that.
Thank you very much. That's sweet of you to say on all fronts.
Well, of course. Well, let's start at the beginning, more or less. Where did you grow up? I
was born, I'm a 4th generation California native, which makes me very rare. And I was born in Glendale, in beautiful Glendale, very near where we are now.
And very near where the Nazi headquarters was for the American Nazi Party?
Startling, huh? And there were also, there were race laws about after sunset in the 50s. I mean, you know, the Jim Crow stuff stayed forever in Glendale. It's startling, really. And I was born at the tallest building in Glendale, at the hospital building, which was only matched by the Sears Tower, which was 3 stories in Glendale. And I was born there in 1957. When I was 10 years old, my family moved to the Bay Area, and so I really grew up with a Northern California sensibility. I lived in San Mateo, just outside of San Francisco.
And what did your folks do?
My mother, before I was born, was an educator, was a teacher, and had quit teaching when she had a family, and then went back to work later. And my father ran a trade organization, the California Trucking Association. And so he worked in your sort of hometown, Sacramento. And my time growing up, my father was a lobbyist. So the whole legislative process and stuff, always, I mean, in my family, you had to know how a bill becomes a law. You were quizzed at dinner.
It was up on the room of your
how
bedroom,
a bill
right?
becomes a law. We actually knew. You had to pick sides in every election. Yeah, all that.
So kind of a union family? I mean, a lot of activism?
No, just the opposite side. Interestingly, because my father was management. So when there was a Teamster strike, my father was representing the trucking owners.
I see.
So we were not a labor house. It was, in fact, it was a real interesting perspective to have, because the idea, and we were really, I mean, at 10 years old, you know, I knew what Teamsters were. They were those thugs who wanted too much.
And now they drive you.
Yes, now they're my best friends.
Yes, absolutely. Siblings?
Yes, I have 2 older sisters. I'm the baby of the family. Yeah, one of whom lives up in Northern California, and one who lives in Santa Monica.
And what was your growing up like?
I lived in we were an upper middle class family. I went to fantastic schools. To live in California and to grow up in the 60s and the 70s was so fantastic, because every arts program was fully funded. And so as a kid who loved the arts, you know, I lived in a great neighborhood. I lived in, I had a school that had everything. So we had a theater department and a band and a choir and sports teams, which I wasn't interested in. But they were there, thank heavens. It kept them all busy while I was in play practice. At that time, there was so much that was it was all made available to us. The whole idea of cutbacks, and no one ever thought of it. Right. So my schools were fantastic, and I really adored that stuff and all that. And I lived in a family that was, you know, just like every movie family from the 70s. You know, Dad coming home with the martini shaker, and Mom being the at-home mom and all that stuff. And then it was all torn asunder, like every family that I knew. I once had a party in the 70s. I was probably a junior in high school, and out of 30 people in my house, 2 people had a set of parents, 2 parents, at home, out of 30 people.
So we're talking divorce?
Yeah, in my case it was divorce. My father moved out when I was 15 years old. And to marry someone with whom he's been married longer than he was married to my mother.
Must
who
have been
actually
hard for your
works
mom,
in
though.
Sacramento. Unbelievably difficult. But it was still, you know, it was still the 70s, and it was still, whenever your life is torn apart, that's painful.
Sure.
And to have it happen when you have teenage children who are not remotely compassionate about it, because they're all wrapped up in their own stuff, that was traumatic. And yet, and perhaps it's because I'm just optimistic about everything or upbeat about it, if you were a gay kid growing up in the 70s, just outside of San Francisco, there's a fantastic thing about having nobody at home paying attention to you.
Didn't know exactly where you were going, didn't know exactly
Nobody
where
knew when
you'd
you were
been.
going, when you were coming home, where you took the car, did you come home, did you? So in fairness, although I could try to paint some picture of some miserable thing, I had fantastically smart friends and an enormous amount of freedom. And because also I was the youngest, fantastic freedom. I had jobs and I was fantastic.
But it's interesting, you know, you wouldn't necessarily think that for a gay young man in the 60s and 70s that they would say it was fantastic, that my youth was fantastic, because there must have been some concern on your part. I mean, to begin to suspect, for instance, that you might be gay, just yourself. The very beginnings of those thoughts are often kind of scary, even in that time, don't you think?
Well, even when I say it was fantastic, of course it's terrifying, you know, and part of that, the view back is a bit rosy, I guess. But it you know, when I think about it, I'm still in touch with my first boyfriend in high school. He lives in New Mexico. He's a wonderful guy, and we email back and forth and talk. And when I think back to some specific events, they're really wonderful. And I think back to other stuff, and I think, you know, it's a cruel, ugly, hard thing, whether you did it in the 70s or whether you're doing it now. But I had, and which I'm always aware of, I had so many advantages that other people don't have. I had advantages of fantastic friends who, as they found out, some knew when I was in high school, some didn't know until afterwards, but everybody knew. You know, I was the boy that if you said, Mom, you know, if you were a girl and said, Mom, can I go out on Friday night and stay out until 2 in the morning? She'd say no. Then she'd say, but Mom, it's with Tom Schumacher. Oh, that's fine. You know,
Sure, of course.
I was that boy, you know. So when I look at it, I think, you know, people were really nice to me. And because I was a theater kid, you know, I wanted to do theater from the get-go. You know, 4th grade, I wanted to be in this little school plays, you know, the Pied Piper of Hamelin or what have you. So when I was in high school, I got very involved in a community theater that was in my city. That meant, you know, kids played kids and adults played adults, and you know, it wasn't like high school plays where you know, drew 4 lines on your forehead to represent adulthood. This was actually, you played a kid, you know. So I did every big musical you can name with adults in the adult roles, and we rehearsed at night and on weekends and then would do these shows. Well, because of that, my circle of friends were other kids who liked theater, kids who were theater tech kids, you know, and adults who ran the theater and adults who were in the shows. And one of them in particular was the drama teacher at a local high school, but not mine, and he ran the program and had been a professional actor and really mentored me all through high school. And because of that, I had an outlet. I had people that were supporting me and watching out after me and encouraging me. So when I look at kids today, I always think, who's doing that for them?
Right.
When I think of organizations I want to help, it's organizations that are going to do that.
What was it that drew you to the theater, or to, you know, performing or whatever? And believe me, I probably know the answer to this in a way. There's something that it's almost like that cannot be denied, but still, your own story.
Well, I have a theory that everybody who gets into theater, no matter where they end up in theater, get in because they could read well out loud. It's just a theory of mine. But you know, there's like 12 kids in the class who can read well out loud, and then the teacher wants you to do the play. I was not actually a very good actor, but I was better than everybody else. And so I got into plays because of that, I guess. There's the hammy factor. And there's the kind of, I like to be part of a group or a family factor. I like the bonding thing. I never played chess in my whole life. The idea of just sitting at a chessboard and playing but all of us together learning some song or learning dance steps was really appealing to me. And it sounds so corny, and it sounds so cliche in a way, but there's a family aspect to being in the theater that I just find lovely. I just find lovely. Because no matter who you're all working together on something. There's an outcast quality to so many people in theater. Even the most fantastic people that you meet always have inside them some sense of wanting to belong because they weren't allowed before, some sense of not being worthy in a sense, and by coming together they create a greater worthiness than their individual sense of themselves. I loved that. I loved rehearsing. I still like rehearsing more than, I have tonight in the theatrical division of Disney that I oversee, there are 16 productions running around the world tonight. The Aida you saw here in Los Angeles last night, it's also playing in Holland, it's playing on Broadway. Lion King is in 6 cities. It's in Japan, it's in Tokyo, it's in Fukuoka, it's in Hamburg, it's in London, it's all these things. My favorite memories of these shows were rehearsing them. The design process, working with the designers, I've the most fantastic directors, Bob Falls, who did Aida, Julie Taymor, who did Lion King. I love that. I love being in the rehearsal room. Last night while you were watching Aida, I was backstage, so hanging out with the cast who, they're sitting there goofing with you, and they go, oh, I'm on. And then they'd run off, and they'd run on stage, then they'd come back and you'd talk some more, and then they'd go back out on stage. I love that.
It didn't show, Tom, at all. They
I was
were totally in
them.
focus. They were totally concentrating. Really a wonderful, wonderful cast.
I love that. I love that thing. I love the disparate nature of it. I love that when you're on a show, there'll be someone who's, older and very experienced, and someone who's doing it for the first time, and the kind of tending and mentoring. I just love the whole mentoring, taking care of people, learning, and then sharing and showing. I love all of that. I love that.
Did you stay with theater through college? Did you go to college?
I was living in the Bay Area, and I went to UCLA actually thinking I would leave the theater behind. I thought I would
do something serious with your adult life.
I would be important now. So I actually thought I was going to be a clinical social worker, and that I would actually do drama therapy, and I thought that was my calling. And I went to UCLA, and after about 6 months of life in my dorm, everybody on my floor who was a theater major kept asking me to be in their scenes that they had to direct or do, and I said, oh, sure. So by the end of my freshman year, I was a theater major, and UCLA for me was fantastic because it was a huge program, and it gave me a chance to act in a lot of shows. It gave me a chance to study parts of theater I had no knowledge of, like puppetry, that I later got very involved with. And ironically, for example, it's the irony of going to a big school. I went to UCLA, I took a class in puppetry just because I was kind of curious, and I was hoping it'd be an easy class, and had this most fantastic professor named Mel Helstein, who was a real world authority on puppets. He taught me all about world theater and puppets. He taught me so much stuff about it. I actually eventually went on to work for this guy named Tony Urbano, this fantastic puppeteer who had a TV show called Dusty's Treehouse. And I worked for Tony, and I learned a lot about commercial puppetry and that stuff. But always in my head was this sort of arty world theater puppet view. And of course, all this time passes, and I'll come back to this, but you jump way ahead, and I'm asked to figure out how to do The Lion King on Broadway. And I say, there's this brilliant woman named Julie Taymor. And then when Julie and I hooked up and talked about it, we shared this huge vocabulary about puppets in world theater, which all came out of my UCLA experience.
Well, I don't think anything is ever lost. I mean, it's interesting. I think you and I are very similar in the way we sort of tell our life stories as though all these wonderful things kind of happened to us, and then the next wonderful thing happened to me. And in many ways, it's not necessarily such an unbroken, fabulous line. But interestingly enough, you never know what you need. You go into experiences, you tuck them away. I didn't even know that I would have to, for instance, fundraise way later in my life when I started just working for the University Religious Conference, and we did little, mailers when I was right out of college, and I learned how to ask for money.
But in a sense, though, what happens is that you have that knowledge, then when it comes up again, you're able to do it. It seems fluid, and I do think it builds.
Isn't the theater in a way, though, almost a hiding place too? Or was it?
Oh, sure. You know, there's a great thing about the theater in that you get to, there's so many levels of hiding. And I have so many friends in different parts of the theater, designers and you know, actors get to hide behind the character. People get to hide behind the curtain. People get to hide behind the light board. It's a place where the lights go out and we become or create someone else. And it's a place of illusion. And as a kid, and I think most kids, I loved magic. I loved magic, I loved makeup, I loved illusion, I loved transformation. How did that happen? How did Topo Gigio actually talk to Ed Sullivan?
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? How does the guy pull all that stuff out? I was drawn to that.
Mm-hmm.
I was fascinated by it and would read that. And I think theater does that. You get to hide inside that. But you're also hiding, if you will, in a world of other people like you.
Mm-hmm.
And what, at first I thought, theater is kind of a gay place. And then I realized, no, theater is just a place for, it sounds horrible, but kind of the reject place, you know, that no matter who you were, the theater group would take you in because we needed everything.
But there's sort of a relationship too, I think, in that, going back to high school especially, where conformity is such an important thing. But even at UCLA, where I also was an undergraduate years before you, and a theater major, it's also a rejection by the larger society of people who are involved in the arts. You know, the attacks on the arts in the past 20 years, especially by the right wing, but not only. When you talk about the privileges we had in school of having these certain kinds of things that we don't have anymore, seems to me there's something in the arts that people consider dangerous as well, and people who engage in them. Now, Disney is not necessarily thought of in this way, thought of perhaps erroneously as simpler or more candy-coated, but many of the animated films that I know you've overseen and been involved in are in their own way stories about the light and the dark, the tragedy and the overcoming.
There is an image that if you have, particularly things that are made for families or for children, that simplicity somehow suggests simple-minded. And animation it's a short form, and it is pared away, but it's like a haiku in a sense, the way animation works. We use very simple, straightforward imagery stacked in a certain way to give you something very profound. And if you look at light and dark, those movies are scary. You know, everyone tells me, you know, I hear oftentimes, oh, you know, those Disney films, those little children's movies, and then everyone tells you how they felt it when they saw Bambi. Well, that's not unusual. When we made The Lion King, we were convinced we had a problem because Simba's father, Mufasa, dies tragically in this stampede of wildebeests, and we thought that would terrify children. And then literally his corpse is laying there, and the boy runs up and tries to wake his father and can't. And everyone thought this imagery was going to be too difficult. And yet, in the whole of the movie, it takes you to this dark place, and then there is a healing. I will never forget a letter we got right after the movie came out from a father whose wife had died, and he didn't know how to explain what had happened. And so as he sat with his children watching The Lion King, they came to understand this idea that gets talked about, you know, where Mufasa's talking about the circle of life. And again, they sound like cliches, but these are they're profound realities. They're fundamental truths. And they're not always the same. And again, I don't know whether your audience would actually know these movies, but there's two of my favorites, of course, are The Lion King for any number of reasons, and a film called Mulan.
Oh, I'll bet you a lot of my audience know this film.
Yeah, and Mulan,
especially the women in my audience.
Mulan is a powerful story. It's based on a Chinese legend of this young woman named Fa Mulan, and she, in medieval China, a family received a draft notice, not an individual. And the oldest male would go, and if the father would go, and if the father had a son, the son would go. And in this case, her father is ailing, had been a war hero, but he was ailing, and she knew if he went, he would die. And so she takes it upon herself to cut her hair, disguise herself as a boy, and take his armor and go off and join the army. She does it not to defy convention, but she's saying that she won't accept convention if it means that her father will die.
You know, it's interesting that a man who is part of a community that for the greatest part of our existence have been kind of denied family, denied recognition of family. That not only are you deeply involved in and leading a part of the industry that is geared toward families, but most of the product is about the issue of family. And just as you said in Mulan, where she really leaves home to save her family. And of course, The Lion King is about family. It's all about family.
But they're always about families that one creates. Mm-hmm. One is born into a family, and one builds a family around them. You know, that if you look at the last tableau of The Lion King, sure, Simba and Nala have had a baby, but Timon and Pumbaa are there.
Right.
He made a family. He made this family thing. I love that. In Mulan, you know, the theme is so totally different. The Lion King says, you have your place in the circle of life and you must accept it. You're born to this, you must accept it. And in Mulan, she says, my destiny is not written for me, but by me. Mm-hmm. These are two opposing themes. I sat with a group of third graders, and because I do these discussion things at Disney where I bring kids in to watch the movies, and I sat with these kids and I asked them to talk about that, and they totally get it. That they're totally different ideas, and they could argue about which one they thought who was right, who was more right, and they come to realize that both of them were the right thing. They could hold those two opposing ideas in their head. They're not simple. They're very real. And also, you know, our films tell you to believe that darkness exists, believe that strangers will help you, believe in yourself. Those are truths, and the darkness never goes away. It's always there.
So is this an experience of your life as well, that you make certain the work that you do gets imbued with? Or is this something that all stories contain and really may or may not have a relationship to your life?
When I went to animation, when I was asked by my dear friend Peter Schneider to come out and work for Disney, we'd been friends, we'd worked on the Olympic Arts Festival together. When I was asked to come to Disney, I'd not been directly involved in film in any way. I had not worked in animation anyway. I knew nothing about it. And I thought, it's a gig and I'll try it because, you know, people who know how to run stuff know how to run stuff. And I went out to produce a movie, and I found that I fell in love with the process. And I found that animation was very much like theater. Rehearsing and workshopping a play was like mounting the storyboards and get an animated movie up. It wasn't like a film set where you just set up, shoot, set up, shoot, set up, shoot. We workshop in a sense. And I loved that community of people who all came together and put their ideas in. And then I realized that these movies actually said something I believed in. And then, which I've been challenged on any number of things, particularly early on in the gay community when I was first at Disney, was the idea of working for Disney. And I said, you know, Disney values are the values of my life. It's the discussion of ideas. It's what's fundamentally in the modern movies. I cannot speak to, you know, Snow White's plight. I wasn't involved. Mm-hmm. But these current movies, I believe in what they say. I actually believe it. I believe in what our company stands for. And I know that sounds nutty to people, because I thought I'd be the last person in the world that would be hired at Disney. And I just discovered a company that embraced me. I was never in the closet at Disney. I'm at a company that was one of the early companies to give domestic partner benefits, and a company, I would argue, that was at the greatest risk of any company in America. And no one was at greater risk for giving these benefits than the Walt Disney Company. My partner Matthew White and I, we celebrate our 20th anniversary in February of this year. And never once have I felt marginalized at our company. He comes to, if it's a spouse event, Matt's there. And at every level, at the most senior level of the company, the most embraced, I might add. It's the complete inverse of what I think everyone would have expected.
But you couldn't have gone without some problem there, either from the outside or inside.
From?
Well, I don't know. I mean, people must have, do they know that there's a gay man running these divisions in that outside sort of right-wing world?
You know, early on, like right when The Lion King came out, I've been there for about 14 years now, and that was probably in the first 5 years. The Advocate did a pretty extensive profile on me, and it was 4 or 5 pages long and pictures and all that stuff. And I got an enormous amount of hate mail, ugly hate mail. ugly stuff. And you realize that that's there. And I had felt somewhat protected from it because I thought that happened to people who do what you do. Mm-hmm. People who are social activists, people who live in the political arena. And I had not originally realized, I knew it was my own personal politics. I was always out, from the time when I was like 18, I was then out. And I knew what that was. And I got slugged, actually at a market near Beverly Hills during when we were the No on 6, the Briggs Initiative. Mm-hmm.
You got slugged just for being in the market, or you were being an activist?
I was out front leafleting, and after a rally that I think I saw you at.
It's possible.
Yeah, and I got slugged, and I thought, oh wow, that's what happens. But I never saw it as a big surprise thing to do. I said you do that, in my house, again, growing up in a house with political activism, even if it was really mainstream legitimate stuff, and my grandfather really believed in stuff, and so I got that. It wasn't until I started getting this hate mail and I realized I was putting not only myself but my family at risk and Matthew at risk and people who were, really despising the fact that I did what I did. What I found startling was that the company, the Walt Disney Company, and particularly the people I worked for directly, did not even blink. Did not even blink. There was a huge letter writing campaign that I should be fired. There were like 3 or 4 of us targeted that should be fired because we were gay people working at Disney. And those campaigns you've seen them. I mean,
sure, they're ugly. Yeah,
and like they have a newsletter and they'll have like a blank sheet and like you fill it out and they tell you fax it in and these huge stacks come.
Right. I hate blank.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank. Right.
And no one blinked. No one flinched. No one flinched, and they never have. Once I recognized that existed, and that I would face that. Then I just accommodated that in my life. A friend who works in the media who gave me tips on how to just rearrange some personal visibility issues. And then I just went right back out and did it. Went right back out and did it. Well, and I actually, being out, once you're out, it's just not a big shock to everybody. I don't care whether other people like it or dislike it. I don't care. They have to respect me. That's all. Give me the same dignity that someone else gets. Give me the same benefits that someone else gets. We haven't had Matt and I have not had a union ceremony. Mm-hmm. Other people, everyone makes their own choice on that. I won't do it. I will not do it until I can get married. Mm-hmm. So that's and mostly because I want to tell people everywhere I go and they say, oh, you guys have one of those? No, we don't. We're not allowed, Mm-hmm. I do that.
Well, it's interesting. You never paint yourself as an activist, and yet you let drop a little line about, well, I was leafleting during, No on 6. This time between college and Disney must have been an interesting, or maybe in some ways difficult time, because I get the sense you're building professionally. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily. You probably have to be out because you're out. And you can't go back in.
It's hard to be.
But you don't have to be out leafleting. How did these things come together?
When you are advantaged, to not take advantage of that is a sin. I mean, I do believe in sin on some level. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. It's just wrong. Here I am. I'm able. I've always been able to pay my rent, and whether I'm paying tiny rent in my cockroach-infested apartment on just east of Normandy, or whether I'm living in a nice house, I've always been able to cover my head. And so always, and my family was always I was working at the North Campus facility, the former Gypsy Wagon at UCLA, and I still wrote my $25 check a year to KCET.
People who don't know about the Gypsy Wagon,
it's a restaurant at UCLA.
It was a little sandwich cart kind of place.
I've always been able to do that, and so to be able and not take advantage of that, not be, I'm advantaged, and to not share that and not to be out there. I don't know how you don't do that.
Well, there's different levels, though, don't you think, Tom?
But see, when you say activists, when I look at people who are really out there doing stuff and dedicating their life, I don't do that, I make my movies and I work on Broadway shows, and before that I did this thing called the Los Angeles Festival, which brought Cirque du Soleil to America the first time and all that, and you know, and all these things that I've done that I've been really excited about doing, and I believe in it. I believe that there's something wonderful about bringing people together and entertaining and enlightening and charming them and giving them hope and optimism, and I believe that. I don't discount my contribution. But my contribution is not out there on the front line doing what people like you do. And it's wrong to pretend that I do that, because I just don't. I support people who do what you do, but I don't do that.
Well, and I'm not trying to make more of it than it is, but to me it's, first of all, it's interesting that simply by being out, people consider you to be an activist. Especially if they don't like that you're out. It's like they use the word flaunt, just because you admit it. Or they will be hostile, as they have been, as you said, about your work at Disney, and I'm sure very threatening to them, because all their kids go and buy every tape, you know, of every Disney animated movie, and they're afraid there's going to be some subliminal, you know, gay message in there. But that is a level of activism not necessarily intended. It's an act of courage often.
Well, sure, we do that. You know, when I love this flaunting thing, I get so pissed off about this. If you can see some guy greet his wife at the airport and is unbelievably intimate with her, when in the 70s, you know, if you hugged someone, in the 80s, you were rubbing people's faces in it.
Right, holding hands. Oh my
holding
God.
hands. How dare they? They're practically making out in the restaurant because they touch each other's hand. They sat on the same side of the table. So we've just defied that always. We've just always defied that, but made it so much a part of our lives that no one even thinks about it now. It just doesn't come up. And I suspect you get the same thing I get, that you get it's not you, it's just the agenda of those people, but it's not you I'm bothered by. Well, what agenda isn't mine? What agenda are we talking about? Just the basic right to exist on the planet and do all the same stuff you do? And I've had a few opportunities to use either my visibility or my position. And I believe in that, because people just need to see you. They need to see that I love the same things they do, and that I'm worried about the same things they are, and that the safety and protection of children on the planet is of such fundamental importance to us, and that's so precious, and that you know that women who have been marginalized and have no access to any help get supported, and all of a sudden you realize, gee, I guess those gay people are just like us. Mm-hmm. And you know, that is my act of that we're all in this thing together. Well,
it's also interesting that you've been in such a long-term relationship, because of course all the messages about our community are just the opposite.
Well, Lord knows the right wing has done everything it can to prevent us from having long-term relationships. Of course. You know, if they could throw a barrier in front of us, it is so absurd. It is rather like saying, I'm going to blindfold you, I'm going to put you in a dark room and throw everything I can in front of you, and if you trip, you're going to be a social outcast.
Or then I'm going to accuse you of not being able to see.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, really.
Yeah, why can't you all stick together? But how dare you defy the sanctity of marriage when 50% of people get married, divorce, or whatever? I mean, it's so absurd.
So how did you meet Matthew? And what was he doing? And what does he do?
He seduced me.
Oh, please. Oh, please.
He drugged me into his spell. No,
he did not.
I took a gig working for the Los Angeles Ballet, which was a company in LA for almost a decade. And
now we can't see you dancing, Tom.
No, I wasn't. I was the assistant general manager of the company, which meant I oversaw payroll, business, a lot of stuff I had no knowledge of, but nobody else would take the job. I have a long history of taking jobs nobody else would take. And I've never gotten a job I asked for, which is a curious thing. They always just come to me. So I said, well, sure, you know, they called me and they knew someone who knew someone, would you come do this? So I go to work at the ballet company, and when I was being interviewed, a board member said to me, wonderful lady, she said, the only rule is, if we hire you, you're not allowed to date any of the women in the company. And I said, well, that is not a problem.
Okay.
That'll be fine. And I thought they were like kidding. And then very soon, you know, we met, and then one thing led to another. And
Matthew was
he was a dancer in the company, yeah. From Amarillo, Texas. Had gone to New York, studied at the School of American Ballet, got recruited for the LA Ballet from there. And yeah, that was 20 years ago.
So I bet he's probably not still dancing with the company, though.
No, now he's a very fancy pants interior designer. He does big fancy homes in New York apartments and gets written about in Architectural Digest. And now he's terribly fancy now. I'm glad I met him when he was available and a humble dancer.
Well, you're pretty fancy yourself right now, actually. I mean, certainly people feel that you are very influential, and probably more than many people know what you've said about animation, for instance, and the participation in the development of a theme or of a direction that a film will take. I don't think many people know about that.
Well, there's so many different ways that you can, when someone says, what does a Broadway producer do? Or what does a film producer do? Or what does a studio executive do? And everyone does it differently. The process that I'm in is that I'm part of it. So that I'm part of the original, what is the idea, how are we going to put that together, who's going to be a player on it, and then stay with it and partner with the team. My job is not to direct the movie or direct the play. I don't do that. I also don't just provide the money and come on opening night. I'm very much in the mix of it. And because I'm managing a portfolio of projects, I get to push forward the ones that I think are interesting. And I work for really wonderful people. I work for Michael Eisner and Roy Disney, who allow me both great freedom and are very committed to the process. They actually love the stuff. Roy loves to be in the room and work on animation. I had lunch with him right before I came over here. He's in the middle of it every day, all the time. Michael Eisner loves the films and completely adores the theater stuff. So in tech rehearsals, he's there in his baseball hat and his sweatshirt, watching us put the show together and giving us notes. They're in the mix of it. So I'm blessed that way. I don't know what it's like someplace else. I've been to Disney 14 years. I was at the festival before that. I was at the Taper before that, and then I was in school. I haven't floated around and seen everybody's stuff. I've probably worked more places more consistently than a lot of people, and made more things, but I kind of have our way of doing it.
And what does the sort of a life in the theater, what does it give you? I mean, I can see that you love it and you enjoy it, but what's the point? And now maybe it's because I'm so much older and I keep thinking, what's the point? I mean, I think that I've made some, but what's the point?
We exist to connect. I think it's the only reason that any of us exist. Now, some people connect with what they write, and they're all alone in a room, and we know them through their words. My life was changed by J.D. Salinger, and I'm probably one of a million people who would say that. My life was totally changed by Christopher Isherwood, both through his writing and actually meeting him on a few occasions. They make connections with us. You connect people because you make connections with people through first your work as an actress and then your work as a legislator. And you transported them in both cases. I connect with people by helping to make things that they see that I think put forward good values and entertain. They're not intended as didactic. They're entertainments that I believe in what's inside them. I think it's the only reason we exist. Well, and everybody you meet that moves you, when you meet someone who makes you cry,
right.
There's a guy who ran All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, a guy named George Regas, who I've come to know a little bit this year. And to know George, when you talk to him, you tear up. A man of faith, a man of fantastic politics, and I think of him as like the ultimate of this, of someone who gives, he connects, he shares. And the better someone is at it, the more they move you and the more they inspire you.
Well, I find him to be essentially fearless too. I mean, one of the interesting things about people who can, many people call it tolerance, but it goes way beyond that. People who can include a multiplicity of ideas in their worldview, who are not afraid that somebody else is going to have an idea or somebody else is going to want to make a point, who would read anything and not be afraid that it was going to, harm them in some way. But of course, that's not the case with everyone.
No, but don't you find that, and I do it with everything now, and maybe it's a part of being older. I also took a great class at UCLA in the philosophy of contemporary moral issues that demanded that you look at the other side of everything you believed in. And it was a fantastic class for me because I do it all the time now. When I find there's an interesting thing that we do in our own community. We are furious if somebody boycotts something we believe in. And yet we're the first people to boycott everything. What's up with that? What is up with that? I often defend Charlton Heston. And people are outraged. Now, when I was a boy working the theater at the Taper, I knew him briefly. He would never even know who I was. But I admire him for his passion, not for his position. But I admire him for his passion. I understand where it comes from. And everyone who is furious with him for exerting his fundamental American right to say stuff that I don't believe in is the same people who think their right should be protected. I never understood that. I never understood.
Well, some people are afraid of the competition of those ideas. I mean, and also, you don't want to just do the sort of kind of philosophy that says, well, you know, no ideas are better than any other ideas. It's all
no, my ideas are better. Don't get me wrong.
Right, exactly.
I'm right, but I can't.
I'm not laughing, Tom.
I'm right, but it doesn't help to just say the other guy doesn't have a point.
Well, we were talking the other night, and you mentioned this to me, actually, and it's something that I only thought of when we were having this conversation. A number of young people, especially in our community, have said, you know, the worst thing that people, or the worst word that people use now in high school and junior high school is the word gay. When they want to say something is really bad, they just say, well, that's really gay. Don't they understand that they're really using this in a way that's discriminatory and they're harming our community? And I said, well, you know, when I was a kid, we would say if an idea was really bad, that's really lame. But we never thought about people with disabilities, and yet it was exactly the same kind of insult. Why choose that word out of a dictionary of 1,000,000 words to say that something is bad? It is a choice and a way of putting down a community.
Well, when you said
but
this,
I wasn't thinking about it.
But when you said it the other night, that simple thing has made me question. When you brought that up, I've told so many people about it, because it made me see everything differently all of a sudden. All of a sudden I go, oh my gosh, I'm that. I do that. The examination of the other guy's point of view is so valuable. I'm convinced why you're so successful in Sacramento. It's too easy just to shout, they are idiots. First off, you're never going to transport anybody by doing that. And it's just too easy. Now, again, I think I'm right. I think you're right. You know, that's why we all have our position. I'm not sure that everybody who thinks they think they're right is. I'm pretty sure that I'm right.
Well, but Dr. King said that there was a sort of an art, I can't even think of what the real quote is, and I'll apologize to all the people who know it, but something about an arc toward justice, that it's sort of inexorable. And I feel there is a winning thing in the world, which is part of my positive philosophy too. I mean, I'm an optimist, but my definition of an optimist is a person who knows how terrible the world can be and therefore is never disappointed. So,
maybe
like,
that's...
I keep saying to people, what'd you expect? You know, just keep up the fight. Of course they're going to say that. But I do believe there is a kind of an arc toward justice, and that the ideas of equality, the ideas of inclusion, and all those words that we're using now in the aughts, or whatever they're calling this decade, are the right ideas, that they're like saving the environment. They're good for the world, and that it's worth the fight. And I think you're also engaged in, whether you probably don't see it so much as a battle of ideas at work, and yet everything that's thrown out there. I mean, I was very struck. I'm not an opera buff, and therefore did not know the story of Aida, and came to it completely fresh. I just had no idea what the plot was. And the notion that you were talking about earlier of the kind of responsibility of having to be who you are because other people need you to be that, and yet wanting to make your own choices, is really, you know, the element of so many stories, including that one.
And it's at the root of it. But that's a struggle that we all have. I'm sure you face this because of your fantastic success, that you are super lesbian. You must feel that way. Matt and I were profiled on this show, In the Life, and somebody asked me, you know, it must be so great. I said, you know, frankly, at times you feel like you have to be super homo. You know what? I am as fallible and as miserable and as challenged as everybody else. And at the same time, it is my responsibility to try to rise up and fulfill that, because I have had advantage. I got lucky, you know. I'm a real believer in luck. Talent is how you manipulate luck.
Well, of course, most people think that there's lots of gay people in the industry, and imagine that you go into a meeting of a big room full of gay people.
It just isn't happening.
No?
no, and I do find it fascinating that people think that. It just doesn't happen. I think people just, that whole ridiculous notion of California, like it's just this liberal place with all the nuts and this. What are they talking about? We're the state that brought you Ronald Reagan, And I don't know why they all think that. And in most places you go in entertainment, it's a room full of white men. Most places you go. And the majority of them are straight. And that's just the nature of it. I'm always surprised by how people think it's so gay aware, because it certainly isn't. And it is more free now, more open now as the culture has been. But geez, look at the 40s and 50s and even 60s with, just all of the secretive. It still is that way among the, the whole closety thing among the performer world, and I understand that. I have no business having an opinion about it, because I'm too busy tending to my own nest before I start.
Well, it is
chucking
easier in
stuff
some
into-
professions to be out or some parts of a profession than others. And again, it's the same thing you were talking about.
Yeah,
when
and then you meet
say,
people like Ian McKellen who are so compelling, and and after spending an hour with him, you go, Ian, go for it.
I know, and it doesn't seem to have hurt his career, since he
No.
seems to be in the sort of the major movie of the year.
The biggest hit of the year, yeah. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what about if you can say, and this may not actually be something that happened, but was their experience unique to being a gay man, especially out as early as you were in your life and therefore all through it, that you bring to your work?
Being constantly misunderstood and thought to be something else, I think makes you strive to make sure other people feel understood. And I do think, my colleagues may disagree, I do think I have a skill at facilitating, to getting people to be able to do their best and to create an environment by which other people can do that. And I think that comes from the experience of having to struggle so much with that. The flip side of that is gay people, and particularly, I can't speak for women. I know for boys, you become fantastic liars really early on, because you have to survive, to keep from getting beat up, to keep from disappointing, to keep from telling the truth.
Right.
You lie. And from that, you develop a fantastic facility to manipulate. And once you learn how to corral that and use that skill to manipulate, to anticipate, to see, because lying is all about preparation. It's like a good lie is like a good paint job. It's all about the preparation. And that once you realize how to command that to good, it works. I also grew up in a house, because my father, who I'm very fond of and I love and I talk to all the time, we had a real rough period, and my father was the classic, 60s dad with the drinking and the yelling and the caring, and a huge man and a huge personality. And he was unrelentingly hard on me as a kid, which meant that you had to have an answer and you had to have a response, or you broke. Now, either he made me strong enough to do this, or I was strong enough, therefore I survived. I'm not sure which is true. But either way, I come out of it a better person than I might have been. And you can, I don't mean to be the corny half glass, half empty or half full, but those people that go through the day and something crummy happens to them, and that's all they can harp on at the end of the day? And then there's those of us who say, isn't it great that only one bad thing happened today?
Right.
That's me. Isn't it great that only one crappy thing happened? Because the other stuff is so fantastic. I used to say to my shrink, and she hated this, I'd say, I'm not dead. And someone said, wow, how does it feel that you're getting older? I said, a lot better than guys who died.
Exactly. Well, my guardian angel gave me this lesson just about a week before my 60th birthday, because I couldn't even believe I was turning 60. I mean, it was like, wasn't I just 40? This is way too quick, and I thought, oh no, it's all going to fall apart now, and I was very agitated, and I knew this time it was about my birthday. So I was in the Capitol, and I thought, I've got to get out of here. I've just got to get out of here. I can't sit still. I'm so agitated. I don't know what to do, but I'm an Angelino. When I'm agitated, I drive. So I went down to the garage in the Capitol, got in my state car, and started driving through Sacramento, which I don't know very well, but you know, all the streets are numbers this way and letters this way, you can't get lost. And I'm driving out in an area in the 40s where the houses are very nice, and I'm looking, the trees are pretty and the houses are pretty, and I thought, this is what I need. I'll just drive down this street and then this street and look at the pretty houses and just kind of calm down. And so I went up this street and down this street and up this street, and when I went down this street, I drove into a cemetery. Who knew there was a cemetery in the middle of Sacramento? Of course, people have to be buried somewhere. And it was one of those cemeteries with a one-way street. So you drive in, it looked like I was just going in another little street, drove in, and I'm in a cemetery, and I had to continue through the whole cemetery because it's a one-way street. So when I got out to the other gate and drove back out again, I said, okay, I get it. I mean, this is like, here's the lesson.
Yeah.
You're worried about your birthday? Here's the alternative. Now, maybe that's not a story that means that. I don't know.
I think it does. We're given gifts, and we're all given extraordinary challenges. You know, and people ask me all the time, because I have this, you know, I travel and I'm always on an airplane and I'm always flying and I don't have time for all these things I want to do, and because I have 3 different jobs, and they always say, oh, you must work so hard, and I think, please. I said, I can introduce you to any number of single mothers in South Central Los Angeles trying to raise 2 boys in a very difficult world. She's got 2 jobs. You know, she's cleaning houses and she's a night nurse in a convalescent hospital, and her mom takes care of the kids when she's out at night, and she's struggling to keep it all together. And you're going to tell me that my job is hard? It just isn't. We can let ourselves go a little bit and just acknowledge that what a treat it is to be making stuff and doing stuff. We should watch out for other people. You know, and whether we are gay or straight, I don't care. I care if you can reach out to people, if you can connect with them, if you can touch them, if you can help them. And if you get in my way, I will crush you. Well, and you have to have that point of view.
Well,
if you try to stop me from what I believe in, I will crush you.
But we think of where we're going, and especially I think certainly in the industry, in terms of stories. We tell stories to each other right here, Tom, to make our point. I mean, storytelling is what you do and what you're engaged in. What story is yet untold? What will you do? I don't mean somebody else's next project. What is the story you'd still like to tell?
For me, the story that we don't yet understand is the true story of inclusion. And that's not a cliche, that's a reality. The other night, I introduced Michael Eisner to my friends Richie Jackson and B.D. Wong. Many people know B.D. Wong because he's a well-known actor. And they have a son, Jackson Fu Wong, this beautiful little boy. And where that little boy came from in his life is a story that I told to Michael, and he was fascinated by. And I realized that this is the story that the world doesn't yet know. That when you think of family and you think of who we are and how we nurture and raise a generation, that for all time there have been so many versions of that. For all time. People raised by grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors. That story has yet to really be told. And until that story is as cliche as the fantastic stories told by Hugh Beaumont and Barbara Billingsley on Leave It to Beaver, the story hasn't been told of what a family is. That story that Hugh Beaumont told was fantastic. He was a smart, wonderful man. And until the story of these created families is told and becomes as cliche as that, the story hasn't been told yet of what family is.
Well, I love that you were comparing sort of in The Lion King, the way this family ends up as that kind of chosen and biological family, and not a fairy tale really in any way, I think.
No, it's legit. It's who we are.
Well, I know you're not going to believe this, but we've been talking for an hour, and now
Won't
our time
I
is
ever
up.
shut up?
No, I don't. I could go for 2 more hours, and probably even after we're done with the show, we'll continue to talk. I'm so glad you were with us today, Tom.
What a treat to be here. No one ever asks me these questions.
I know. Well, that's
I wish I could have hyped a movie. I'm really good at that.
You know, we'll send you the tape, and you don't actually probably need to hype your movie since everybody is buying at least 3 copies of the videos and giving 2 away. And I hope that you've enjoyed this as much as we have, because there are lots of stories that Tom Schumacher's been involved in telling, and I hope you're busy telling your own stories, and I hope you get used to it.